Well, good morning. I'm Jeff Coleman.
And I'm Debra Pinkerton. Welcome to Morning Light.
In just a minute, our Morning Light panel will go behind the headlines.
But first, here's a preview of what's coming up later in the show. Music plays a significant role in church services, but with pop culture and entertainment becoming more of an influence in our daily lives, it does raise the question, should a Christian listen to secular music? Well, our Morning Light culture and media contributor will weigh in. Plus, part two of my interview with We Are Messengers frontman Darren Mulligan.
And our contributor is going to be going through your playlist to see what's on there.
Absolutely.
Later.
I'm sure he's going to like it.
I'm sure he will. Well, it is Thursday, November 21st, and it is that time of the year for presidential pardons. A few days from now, President Joe Biden will, as tradition dictates, pardon the national turkey and, of course, announce a slew of more serious presidential pardons of people. To heal the nation, some are encouraging the president to do something more dramatic by pardoning his successor, President-elect Donald Trump. Senator Mitt Romney has called for it, along with a chorus of influential publications. But could a pardon be an opportunity for healing and national unity, like the pardon of Confederate President Jefferson Davis after the Civil War, or more recently, President Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon? It's a big, tough question, I think.
It is. It's an opportunity for healing.
So
I
you're
love
voting
that.
yes on that?
I think that would be something that
I'm going to wait to see what the panel says before
but it will be something to help the country move forward for
yeah.
sure. Well, in the hours leading up to Thanksgiving Day, thousands of volunteers with Meals on Wheels will deliver nourishment and simple kindness to shut-in seniors. But none of it would have happened if there had not been a woman named Margaret Toy, the pastor's daughter and Christian social worker at the Lighthouse, located in the Kensington neighborhood of Philadelphia. Today, there are 5,000 independently run programs in America. Well, our panel will spotlight ways today's Christians are meeting the deep needs in our community. Well,
my in-laws, who are probably watching this morning, may be getting ready to do their Meals on Wheels run in Florida.
So. Oh, that's wonderful.
Well, on this date in 1620, 41 men of a total of 120 passengers aboard the Mayflower signed the Mayflower Compact, the laws for a settlement in the New World. The loyal subjects of King James would live in accordance with the Christian faith and create a system of laws based on simple democratic principles. But what forgotten lessons from our Pilgrim forebears should inform our ongoing struggle for religious freedom in this world, in the modern world? What can we learn from them, from the Pilgrim example? We'll take those questions to our Morning Light panel this morning. And a distinguished panel it is. Senator Greg Rothman, welcome back. Good to have you. Dr. David White, thanks for being here all week.
Great to be here.
And Matt Brouillette. Good to have you.
Good to be back.
So who wants to tackle the Pilgrims here? Now, the Pilgrims have gotten a bit of the short shrift in the last decade or two. Not every student in every public school classroom this week is dressing up like a pilgrim. But there are still lessons from the Mayflower Compact going forward that inform our laws today, that set the boundaries for what we understand as religious liberty. Anyone want to weigh in? Man?
Well, as a former history teacher, I guess I'm supposed to take that.
You've got
it. It is truly amazing when you look back in the history of America and the founding documents that created what would become the freest, most prosperous, most generous, most religiously tolerant nation that in the history of mankind.
And that's key.
That is key.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what allowed us to survive. We're coming up on our 250th anniversary. And I think it's these core tenets that are founded in the Bible that have allowed America to be what America is. That, we're 5% of the world's population, but the other 95% of the world depends on America's success. And it goes back to the Mayflower Compact and the establishing of our Constitution. It is those founding documents that I believe are grounded in biblical principles for life, of our order, of how God has made us, that I think is that lasting tradition and impact on that affects us in 2024.
What was that percentage about the 5% of the world had?
We are 5% of the world's population, but the other 95% depends on America being
That's
great.
So true.
It is.
So you're nodding over there. You agree. Well, why is the notion of, when people talk about the founding of the country, this was founded as a Christian nation, but the notion of being a plural society, about having the freedom to choose the path that you take, very much a part of that founding generation. Why is their example so important today?
Well, I'm not a history teacher, but breaking out my old books, I was able to do some study. I mean, as I understand it, that Mayflower Compact was born out of conflict, where there was, there's some disagreement, they're landing in the wrong place at the wrong time, and tensions are building. And somebody said, "Hey, let's create some order here. We need some structure for how we together move forward. Not everybody's on the same page." So how do we do that? Well, in that document, it says that this is for the general good of the colony. And I think that was impactful in that there was a recognition that though there's differences perhaps in core beliefs or doctrinal beliefs, we can all recognize that there's the steps we can take are good for all. And I think whether we're pursuing our own protection of our own religious freedoms, we have to think, okay, is this good for all? And it is. We want to protect others' freedoms as well. And that doesn't only apply to religious freedom.
So you're part of a legislative body that has a long tradition of having a prayer at the beginning of the legislative session every day. But you also have members who are nominal believers, unbelievers, or believe differently from you. The framework that they created, still important today?
Well, yeah, of course. And look, to go further, I mean, the rights that we talked about in the Declaration of Independence come from God. They don't come from man. We don't give each other rights. And so, and God made all of us, whether someone believes in that God or not, he still made them. And we still need to protect those rights. And that's what the legislature should do. Man doesn't give each other rights. And sometimes we feel like that's the position we're in. But really what we should be doing is protecting those rights that God gave you.
I'm going to talk Turkey here. The presidential turkey is going to be pardoned. We don't know the name, we don't know the size, we don't know what farm, but we know it's going to happen. President Biden, one of his last big official acts, will be pardoning the turkey. But there is some symbolism here, and there are people who are saying to President Biden, please, President Biden, would you just go ahead and wipe the slate clean for your successor so we don't have to go through the agony of this, what President Ford called our long national nightmare. Well, how would you view the possibility of a pardon?
I mean, I think that would be incredible. I think it'd be incredibly healing. I mean, we've seen what happens when humility is displayed by our elected officials. I mean, I think we experienced that when J.D. Vance was expressing compassion during his vice presidential debate, when Tim Walz was talking about his son experiencing gun. I think that can be translated into these pardons. Absolutely. And I think that, look, I think it could be reciprocated by President Trump when he's in office. So to me, this is
with
unique.
the president's son.
Correct.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I think we're coming out of what has been a very tiresome season of weaponizing shame, cancel culture, canceling one another for our wrongs. And I think that was born out of people feeling a sense of powerlessness or maybe aloneness. And so there's a sense of community and purpose when you gather with others with a common enemy. The reality, though, is I think that's common enemy friendship is no friendship at all. And I think it's perpetuated what we talked about yesterday, which was loneliness. So I am hopeful with a pardon, cautiously, but I think it depends on the language that is used surrounding that pardon. I think it's an opportunity to show compassion and point people forward, moving away from vindictive shame to one of mercy and forgiveness.
Common enemy friendship is no friendship at all.
Right.
That's beautiful. Greg?
Yeah, and my heart wants to say, let's pardon it, because we all need it.
Yeah.
Pardon everybody. But on the other hand, there needs to be some responsibility taken. I mean, there should be repentance. You talked about it yesterday, right? I mean, before you get the pardon, you have to acknowledge what you've done.
Right.
And there is a two-tiered system in America where certain people are treated differently. And I think that's a lot of the cynicism that people had was, well, why do people get away with what they've done?
Yeah.
When we have other people in prisons for doing the same thing. And so I think we have to be careful, but I do think for national healing it would be a good move.
Yeah, that's interesting.
My friend Chuck Colson wouldn't accept a presidential pardon from Ronald Reagan.
Is that a fact? Chuck Colson, Prison Fellowship Ministry.
He went to prison over Watergate. He was offered pardons by Reagan. He said, no, I got my pardon. Yeah, I'm guilty, and I got my pardon.
Well, look, we're in Thanksgiving season, and one of the ministries that will be out everywhere, and people are working this morning, Meals on Wheels, 5,000 individual stations all over the country, all over the world, founded in World War II comes to Pennsylvania and then goes to the rest of the country. Are there ministries that are in our neighborhoods that we're not aware of, that if you look back at Margaret's life, just a simple Christian woman saying, yeah, I'll do that, I'll organize that, not knowing where God's going to take this? Are there ministries in our community that you see, that you're aware of, that this Thanksgiving are out there that we should be paying attention to, or work in our community?
Well, I know that one of my passions, and I'm sorry Pastor Josh isn't here, is that how we help kids.
By the way, his birthday today, 40th
right.
birthday. Happy birthday, Josh Roberts.
We won't sing, we'll spare that. But one of my passions is helping kids that are trapped in some of our worst schools. And Josh has a vision for a Christian school for black boys in the inner city. That to me is like a vision for how you renew our urban areas. And so I'm committed to those things. So I see those opportunities to help families.
Pastors United for Education is
right.
the group. You can learn more about that. David?
Our church has long supported Peace Promise, which is a ministry oriented towards coming along, partnering with survivors of sex trafficking. Wow. And we tend to think of that as an issue that we only see far away from here. Other nations are far across the land, but it's in our backyard. I've seen it many times in the emergency department, the consequences of those tragedies. But
there's still denial. I mean, a lot of people say it's not happening here.
Correct,
right?
And it is. It's in our backyard. And so Peace Promise has partnered with these surviving women and ensures that they have the things they need, from clothing to food to housing, but also the intensive emotional, spiritual, and physical care that they need coming out of those experiences. And beyond that, they go into economic empowerment and training, job skills, and they have 2 businesses that can be supported that support their ministry. One is called Soaps by Survivors, which I love the imagery there. It's cleansing and renewal. And there's also in Camp Hill, Good Ground Coffee Company.
Oh, I've seen it.
Yes,
yeah.
And that's a Peace Promise organization.
Greg, final word, 30 seconds.
Oh, Bethesda Mission is my favorite in Harrisburg, and what they've been doing in ministry and for the homeless. And there's still a huge problem with homelessness in the city. I don't necessarily think it's the homelessness as much as a mental health and substance abuse problem, but they've addressed it from a spiritual sense, which is really the only way.
Bethesda Mission, and doesn't take one dime of government money.
Yeah.
Beautiful examples. Thank you all for being with us on the panel this week very much. Well, coming up next on Morning Light, music is a powerful medium that can influence thoughts, emotions, and of course behaviors. So as believers, as Christ followers, we're called to be discerning listeners. We'll talk to our Morning Light culture and media contributor for tips on how we can evaluate a song's message and impact on our faith. And good morning to all our friends in Dauphin County and the Stony Creek Inn. I know you're watching Morning Light on Lighthouse TV.
We hear music everywhere. We listen to it in the car, at home, and we sing along to some of the tunes as they play while we're shopping. As Christians, though, what music should we listen to? Here to help us answer that question is our Morning Light culture and media contributor, Josiah Malinich. Thank you for being with us.
Good morning, Debra.
So let's talk about music and what music we should really choose to listen to.
Yeah, it's great. Music is so beautiful, is it not? I mean, music is everywhere. I think it's one of the common things that people rally around. It's something that we all appreciate in some capacity. But when you look at what the power of music has, psychologists wouldn't be bold enough to necessarily say, hey, there's an actual specific impact it has. But in many studies that they've done, you can see that depending on what you listen to, stress levels change. Blood pressure changes. Oftentimes, music can even be used as a therapeutic to help with memory loss and healing. And so all that to say, I think it speaks to the fact that music simply has a great impact on the human experience, whether we like it or not. So when we take that filter of making a decision, I always come back to this in our lives, coming from the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 10. And he says, everything is permissible, you say, but not everything is beneficial. Matter of fact, he says not everything is even good for you. And he goes through a lot through that passage and even talks about you shouldn't drink from the Lord's table and also from the table of demons. Aggressive language. What is he saying? Don't partake of things that are going to impact your soul negatively. So when it comes to music, I think there becomes a place for us to question, what are we listening to, what are we partaking, and what are we choosing to allow into our mind?
Well, and I have heard that even, like, say, grocery stores, they play different types of music depending upon the day. So I think it does, they realize that music does play a part, even, say, when you're shopping. So
Absolutely.
It does definitely influence you. So let's talk about Christian Christian music? What are the benefits of listening to Christian music?
Yeah.
I love it. I've
Yeah.
listened to it for ever since I can remember.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think the beautiful part about music is that when you look in the Bible, so many different times, right? We have a whole book of Psalms, which really is songs. Music is meant to worship and glorify God. That's the main primary use of it according to the Bible. And so when it comes to Christian music, right, Christian is being used as an adjective in that sense. But what it's simply saying is does this honor God? Does this glorify God? Does it promote the things that are healthy for Christian living that the Apostle Paul would line out in his letters? And so when we look at that, we want to find music that brings life. And actually there's a clear power in spiritual music that honors God, because even in 1 Samuel 16, when you see David and Saul's relationship, the Bible records a time where Saul's tormented and he's like all in his emotions. You could even say today it would be trendy to say he was depressed or anxious, whatever it might be. But when he feels that, he calls for David and says, hey, come play your harp, come sing in my presence. And he worships God and he does this in his presence. And the Bible says that the evil spirit has to leave. And so wickedness, darkness can't cohabitate with the light. And so the power of Christian music, the power of music that honors God, is that darkness can't cohabitate in that same environment.
Yeah, that is so true. And I always love it when I turn on the radio and you're going through something and you hear that song that just makes a difference.
Right.
The words can be so powerful and really,
Absolutely.
really touch you. So what about secular
Yeah.
music? Should we listen to secular music?
Yeah, well, I think it's a great question, because when we get into defining secular, right, secular is often used as a negative term, but it just means, more paganistic, more of the culture. And I would say a better question that we should be asking when it comes to, again, listening is, does it glorify God or not? That's what Paul says. He says, whether you eat or whether you drink, right, do not participate in darkness, but honor God. I think there's also a difference between carefree music and anti-Christ music. There's music that's not necessarily theological, perhaps, but it's not, representing things of the world. But there are plenty of music out there that promotes, agendas to degrade women, agendas to, glorify substances and evil things. And I think that's where Paul's getting at when he says, you can't eat from that table of demons. Don't things that are sacrificed to idols. What he's saying is in your heart, what are you allowing? And so I think the better question, Deborah, as we listen to music is it actually edifying to our soul? Is it building us up? And so if it's not tearing us down, there can be a neutral, right? There's a part of even, where Jesus says to the disciples, if they're not against us, they're for us. And so there's a piece of allowing things into our life, not being afraid of it, but being smart. What are we consuming?
Right, absolutely. You definitely don't want to. I mean, there's so many songs out there that are very dark.
Right.
So, but what really amazes me is Christmas music.
Sure.
I mean, everyone sings some of these songs, and Jesus is mentioned in so many of them, and there's just that Christian theme.
Right.
My pastor had a whole series on this, and, it just amazes me that people don't realize what they're listening to.
Yeah, I think they're speaking out of recognition for, again, it's interesting in our culture, especially in the Western world, that Jesus is really, he's a concept, not necessarily a friend. And so I think a lot of people in our world, that's where you have these people who profess faith in Christ, but they don't even know what that actually means to live a life out. And so when it comes to the music side of things, I think that's where even referencing, that's in Mark chapter 9, when the disciples come to Jesus and say, hey, somebody was casting out demons in your name, but we stopped him. And he says, don't stop them. And he simply says that because if they're not against us, then they're for us. I look at that in the same way as Kanye West, who is very a controversial figure. People have their opinions about him however they want. He released an album several years ago called Jesus is King. And regardless how you feel about it, regardless how you feel about him, there were billboards in Times Square that said Jesus is King. So God will get his glory.
Absolutely. Thank you, Josiah.
Yeah.
I always love talking to you.
Absolutely.
And coming up next on Morning Light, I sat down with the frontman of We Are Messengers, Darren Mulligan. He shares how he hopes audiences are influenced by the band's music and message.
Father, would you hold my hand? The waters rising, I can't stand. Oh, I led myself to sinking sand. So, Father, would you hold my hand?
Darren Mulligan wanted a career in rock music, but little did he know that God would use that passion to help spread the gospel around the globe. The We Are Messengers frontman shared his powerful testimony with me when they were in town for a concert at Christian Life Assembly. Fame and fortune is not the focus for the We Are Messengers frontman. Darren Mulligan told me he wants to see people won for Christ. I did sit down with him when the band was in town for a concert at Christian Life Assembly. Darren, thank you so much for being with us. We're here at Christian Life Assembly where you performed a concert. Talk to us about how you got involved with Christian music.
Yeah, I was never in my plan to be a Christian musician. I knew nothing of Jesus. I was an atheist. I was a drunk. I was an adulterer at the time that I got into, I guess, that journey. Essentially, my long-term girlfriend of 10 years fell in love with Jesus, had this radical transformation in her life, which ultimately led me to accepting Jesus as my Lord and Savior a few weeks before we got married. And at the time, I was about 27. I'd been playing music in rock and roll bands all my life, playing guitar. But I sold all my instruments. I associated everything evil that I had done, you know, affairs and adultery and violence and drunkenness, with music. So I said, I'm going to go cold turkey. No more music for me. I'm out. I just want Jesus.
Take it all away.
And a couple of years later, they needed someone to play guitar in a youth group, little mission in our hometown in Ireland, Monaghan. I said yes. They needed someone to sing. They asked me. I was like, I've never sang, I can't sing. But they were stuck, so I said yes. Started singing. And for 3 years, my wife and I and my little brother and some friends traveled around Ireland telling people about Jesus. And fast forward, it was in 2014. I was sitting outside my oldest son's school. I was sitting in the car, and I remember praying out loud. I said, God, I don't need music anymore. I just want you. And the next day, Warner Brothers called, offered us a record deal, wanted us to move to America. I didn't want to go. God was very clear that we were to leave. So we packed 5 suitcases up. My mom and dad dropped us to the airport 10 years ago, almost to the day. And we landed in Nashville, Tennessee. Very afraid, lots of tears. And I went to work, started writing songs. And the first song we put out was a song called Everything Comes Alive, based on Ephesians 2.
In the morning when my heart is cold.
And it was a top 10 radio song. And from there we've had plenty of success, if you want to call it that. But our lives have just been this whirlwind of saying yes to Jesus, even when it's really, really hard. And it has been so joyful and so life-giving. This Jesus walk is brutal. It's beautiful. It's horrendous. It's joyful. It's suffering. But it's all so worthwhile, you know.
Talk about God answering your prayers. Oh my goodness. Talk to me about some of the topics in your songs.
Mental health's a big one. The idea that you don't have to be ashamed if you struggle with depression or suicidal ideation or cutting or any deep loneliness or any haunting of your mind in the dead of night, that you don't have to be ashamed. Jesus knows we hurt. We're humans, and the good news is he's fond of humans. So we write songs to remind people that that's okay, but it's not where your story ends. He's making all things work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. You know, I mentioned it earlier, C.S. Lewis talks about it, that everything sad is being undone. We write songs for people that even in the sadness, to remind them, it's okay, hold on just a little bit longer. It's being undone.
Maybe it's okay.
Everything has been made right in Jesus. We're just waiting for time to catch up with the finished work of Christ.
How do you hope you're using the talent God has given you to make a difference?
I hope that when we leave venues, be it churches, theaters, or arenas, or whatever we're in, that the security staff and the caterers and the truck drivers and the volunteers talk well about us, that we were good news to them. It's easy to put on a front and be one thing on a stage, but the true measure of a performer is whether they're a better man off stage than they are on stage. And our team do such a good job at loving people well, and that's taken a lot of years to build that kind of culture. So I want people to remember that we didn't love music, we love people and we love God.
Thank you so much, Darren, for taking time out of your very busy schedule to talk with us.
My pleasure. Thank you, ma'am. Hey guys, I'm Darren Mulligan from the band We Are Messengers, and I hope you tune in to Morning Light on Lighthouse TV weekdays at 9 a.m.
Well, thank you, Darren. Well, when President Andrew Johnson pardoned the former president of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, on Christmas Day, 1868, it was part of a decree granting amnesty to defeated Confederate soldiers. Northern newspapers like the Chicago Tribune suggested Davis should have been hung instead. Pardons are never popular with at least half the country. Remember Emperor Hirohito? Well, he wasn't charged with war crimes after America defeated Japan in World War II. And President Gerald Ford's pardon of Richard Nixon cost him the presidency. Look, if President Biden pardons his predecessor and now successor, it won't do much for his approval rating either. But maybe, just maybe, it will allow for some needed national healing, or what the Bible calls reconciliation. And for anyone who thinks pardons ignore justice, the ultimate judge has never ignored the cries of the victims. Ultimate justice always served. For Debra and the entire Morning Light team, I'm Jeff Coleman. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check on your neighbors. We'll see you again tomorrow morning.